Hi, everybody.
All right, so I'm a little nervous because I think everything's going to go so smoothly.
Okay, I can screw it up.
We don't have any computer swaps to do or nothing. So one thing I will mention before Barb comes up and does her usual bit is that John Asselos brought his binocular telescope up to the meeting. So afterwards, we're kind of getting back to what we used to be as sky watchers, watching the sky. So you know, after we take the group photo and all that stuff, we'll go out in the parking lot and you can look through his telescope at whatever he is going to be showing tonight. Moon, okay, I guess it's a lot of moon. Okay, and with that, I guess Barb, you want to come up and do your usual prelims?
Okay. So here's our sky maps. Got one, that we hand out every time. And yeah, just thank you all for being here. And I think our next meeting will probably be 4 weeks from tonight, maybe 5. We haven't quite decided yet, but we'll let you know. And into the future, you know, we're doing a number of talks that are more aerospace engineering oriented. And we may have Hans-Peter Schaub, who is one of our local people, who's in charge of the aerospace engineering at CU in the future. We haven't talked to him yet, but we're hoping he will do that. Also, Leonard and I were at the NASA Lucy asteroid mission presentation at Southwest Research Institute a couple weeks ago. And Hal Levinson is the PI, I guess, on that mission. And we want to get him up here. He's a little busy because they just went by an asteroid recently. Which one, Leonard? Or
Donald Johansson.
yeah, Donald Johansson. And you know, he's a great speaker too. You know, we always have great speakers here. So we'll let you know on that. I think you're all on the email list. And we'll try, I think we're going to try to do, you know, sometimes we go 6 weeks. I think we're going to try to do every 4 weeks into the summer, so we can get people in when they don't have to, you know, like Robert Super, you know, where we had to go to Zoom because there's way too much snow on the roads that night. And we're honored to have him here and Fran on the internet. And yeah, so thanks so much for being here. And then
Leonard is going to
Leonard's
introduce
Andy.
our
Yeah,
honored
and we are honored to have Andy and Maureen, his wife, here. If you haven't met her, she's really fun too.
Leonard, what do you know about me?
Whatever I know, it's right here.
Yeah.
Don't read that.
Yeah,
You sent it.
yeah, this has been authorized. I just want to thank Andy for coming up. That's great to have him here and to discuss the commercial space activities that are very vibrant right now. As many of you know, he's the son of Buzz Aldrin, who was on the first landing crew on the moon in 1969, but more important, or equally, or even, you know, it tops it. He's the executive director for space programs at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University worldwide. It's the largest grad space studies program in the world.
In the solar system.
In the solar system. That's why he's running it, because he's cocky.
I tried saying the universe, but my astrobiology friends said, no, you can't see that.
Anyway, he's also running the Aldrin Family Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to harnessing the inspiration of space to ignite a passion for STEM and STEAM education in students of ages and all backgrounds.
Leonard, you need to define STEAM. This
Science,
particular-
technology, education, and mathematics and arts.
Yeah.
That close?
Yeah.
They may have banned that now. I don't know. if it's-
Yeah.
Can you say that? Shut this off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Won't get fun.
Yeah, I'll get a parking ticket. Anyway, it's great to have him here and I really thank him. We've been pursuing his knowledge for this particular talk for quite a while, so great to have you here
Thanks.
and thanks for coming.
Thanks a lot.
No.
So, I'm a space cadet. All of you are pretty much space cadets. There's one big difference between me and you. You all enlisted voluntarily. I got drafted. Right, when I was 6 years old and my dad was practicing spacewalks. Underwater, he strapped tanks on me and I was gonna be his dive buddy. Never had anything to do with spacewalks, but I did start diving with him. And since that time, for the ensuing 60 years, I had a conversation with my dad about space. Actually, you all know you don't really have conversations with Buzz. It's a monologue, right? There was one time, Maureen will remember this one time, I was painting the deck. I had to paint the deck. And Dad called me and wanted to talk about something with cyclers, Mars cyclers. And I said, Dad, I gotta paint the deck. He said, go ahead, paint the deck. So I'm painting the deck and occasionally I go over, yeah, no, I don't agree with that at all. And literally for an hour and a half, he kind of went on. So that was the monologue. But anyway, this is my own monologue. So, I have spent a lot of time at or near beaches in Florida. I grew up in California. However, open disclosure, I was not a surfer, but I know something about waves. But I came up with a metaphor of waves as sort of a way of describing things that the waves of commercialization in space, because this is not the first time we've done this, and it seems to work. We may come up with another story in the future. I think it's the long and winding road, maybe the next lecture, but for now, we're going to talk about waves.
If that doesn't work, I need to do something.
Oh, it worked. Okay,
I'm done.
so, and besides, I can just hit the space bar anyway. So surely, we are at the dawn of space commercialization. We have 3 of the wealthiest people in the world spending fair chunks of their own money, but more importantly, their own personal investment in space. We've got all kinds of things going on. We've got constellations, we've got big rockets, we've got small rockets. This must be the dawn of space commercialization. Well, it's not. It's not. We've seen this movie before. So let's talk about the waves of commercialization. We had one, kind of the wave that never broke with the shuttle. Second, the wave that wiped us out with Iridium. And here we are today. We're not sure whether we're going to get wiped out or whether we're going to have the ride of our lives. And so that's my story here. We're going to go through these. So here's the first wave. The wave that never broke. I mean, because you think about it. Back in this time, this turned out really weird. Okay, we were going to have space stations. We had industrial space facilities. We had commercial remote sensing. We had space tourism. In fact, I've got space tourism. I had to do it this way because at Embry-Riddle, I can't use copyrighted images. I had this beautiful image I used to use at Boeing of a space shuttle with advertising all over it. And I'm not kidding you. We were out there pitching the idea of a commercial space shuttle. And I know this is true because these guys used to come to our house. A group of United pilots calling themselves ASAP. I'm not sure what it stood for, but what they wanted to do was they were going to take over the shuttle. And my dad was going to help them. If any of you were around him at the time, he was going to fill the shuttle bay with seats and pods, and people were going to fly and all of this stuff. And it was batshit crazy. But these guys were doing it. But the point is, a lot of the stuff we're talking about today, actually, people did real work. I mean, Max Faget designed the Industrial Space Facility which actually makes a lot more sense than some of the CLD stuff we're seeing today, because it was only crew tended, right? Max understood you don't want people around experiments. Anyway, we did a lot of stuff, but what happened? One event. One event. So whatever was happening here, just took one wave to wipe it all out. And that was unfortunate, because there were a lot of good things that happened. One good thing that happened in this time was we actually passed the Commercial Space Launch Act, which even today is kind of the foundation of the legislation, which enables us to actually buy things from the private sector. So, what happens next? Cue the wipeout. I really need some Dick Dale music to go with it. Sure, I do. I know. I've been thinking about doing it, but nobody ever has a sound system that works. Anyway, the wipeout. So most of you lived through this. Most of everyone else has forgotten. So look at what happened. We were going to darken the sky with satellites. Teledesic was going to put out at 1.840 satellites, which was incomparable.
That was wipeout.
You're late, dude.
Yeah, but if you only keep me earlier.
You'll get another opportunity. Okay, we were gonna darken the sky with satellites. You had 8 constellations, 1,120 satellites, for approximately $74 billion of proposed investment. We had 2 of the richest people in the world, Craig McCaw and Bill Gates, were behind Teledesic. Of course, the launch people. I spent part of my career on the launch. This is painful. 11 different launch vehicles were proposed. Some of you were probably involved in these. What could possibly go wrong? Well, so of those, only 3 were finally deployed. Everyone else went out of business. I had a great animation, everything just like shattering. Anyway, we ended up with 3 constellations though, Iridium, Globalstar, and Orbcomm. 3 constellations, 188 satellites, and $18.4 billion of capital expenditure. This isn't proposed stuff. This is actually hardware companies' stuff in space. This is great. What could possibly go wrong? By the way, 2 launch vehicles survived this whole thing, Atlas and Delta, with about another $5 billion of CapEx. Well, everybody went bankrupt. Remember, 3 constellations, 188 satellites, $18 billion, sold in liquidation for $80 million. Now, one of the old statements of commercial space was, if you want to make a small fortune in space, start with a large one, right? You've all heard this, but this is insane. This is insane. So, this was not a great time to be a space cadet. But in the background, about this time, Blue Origin and SpaceX are being created. Really, these companies started in the early noughts, as we say, didn't really come out until later this time, but things were happening. Investment was tough. Though I'll tell you, we'll get into this in just a second. Here's the third way. Now, as I said, I'm not a surfer, but I know you kind of look at this wave and the way it's shaped. This guy's either going to have a great ride or he's going to get totally wiped out. Now, cue wipeout. Okay, that's it.
You're gonna get the first bar though.
That's it. Okay. So here is the wave. The $1 trillion space economy. The interesting thing is if you look at it, and actually there are numbers that when you start adding second order impacts in non-satellite industry, it gets to be crazy amounts of money. How much of this stuff is really space? Right? I'm missing a sheet. Reasonable growth, but if you look at what's really space, these are government programs right here. This is commercial satellite, this little green sliver. So how much of this is really commercial? This stuff, which is communications, Actually, this is ground systems. GPS chips. This is SATCOM. Most of the stuff is actually applications. And if you look at investment, so, oh, I'm missing a chart. Okay, it's actually up to about $327 billion. This is from a database run by Space Capital. Fantastic data. And it's cool because we've got investment across the board in lots of different companies. Over $300 billion of investment, 29 billion in SATCOM, Earth observation, $24 billion. Human spaceflight, almost 4 billion. Lunar development, not a lot, less than $1 billion. Launch vehicles, of course, 35 billion. Now, for those of you keeping track of the numbers, what's missing? About $200 billion. That's holding back. 192 billion of the 297 is in your cell phone. GPS apps. Now, that's not to say it's not space, right? GPS is dependent on space. But when you think about commercial space, just be aware that this stuff is really different from this stuff. And the applications, some of the people actually count the revenue from the broadcast shows as part of the space economy. To be sure, that stuff is enabled by space. But if what you're trying to understand is what is the effect of space on the total economy, that's a good number. But what is really space? You kind of look more at hardware, ground systems, things like that. Okay, so let's talk about investment in space. So we're now looking at, these are millions of dollars, $50 billion being invested in some years in space systems. But again, as I said, most of this stuff is GPS. What could possibly go wrong? You know what's coming here, right? Where we are now. So the bottom is dropped down, partially COVID. But the thing that kind of got me interested in, okay, so how does this relate to investment in general? So if you look at venture capital, it's big numbers overall, but how does this compare to investment in space? This is, I went back and calculated.
Now I'm worried.
US
Make me say yes,
that is space.
and I may have done that.
What?
Sorry.
Hot mic.
Okay.
Okay.
Anyway, if you look at, this is interesting, in 2016, 10% of all VC investment in the US was space. But now it's dropped down to about 3%. So money is fleeing space, if you will, faster than it's fleeing other places. And so that's a little bit of a concern, not surprising. And space is generally high risk. And what's happened since 2020 is money has fled to security. But this is an area of concern, I think, for all of us. There are signs of some life in 24, but if you're an investor, you're a lot more careful about where you're putting your money in space today than you were back in 16, when literally you throw money at any signpost that said space on it. So let's actually, we're going to go out and jump on a few waves. So the first wave we're going to look at is telecom, SATCOM specifically. But you got to understand about satellite communications is it's just a small, frankly, low performance part of the overall telecom. So if you're in an urban zone, you've got 10 to 20 gigabits a second. You've got millimeter wave cellular. It won't work here, but from my house, my office, facing the mountains, I can pull down 500 megabits on my cell phone. SATCOM is never going to compete with that. And I'm here in the suburban areas. So SATCOM is not, there are people that will buy Starlink just to buy Starlink, but it doesn't make any sense if you've got wired, even if you've got 5G. Any place you can get 5G, you're going to get much better service than you're going to get with Starlink or any space-based program. until we get to optical communications. That could change things. So you're left with rural, which how many of you are on Starlink here? That's all? Really? I mean, because it's a godsend for you if you're out here, right?
We have great fiber up here.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Where?
So, no, but so that's my point. The share of the world served by 5G or fiber is not shrinking. And so space is going after a smaller and smaller market. Actually, aviation, maritime is kind of cool. But I calculated that United Airlines, if you kind of put it on every one of their planes, is worth about $1 billion a year, which isn't bad. But SpaceX is a $350 billion company. To justify that investment, they have to have a couple $100 billion a year in revenue and huge margins. So they need a lot more than what's here, I think. So what's the rest of the world look like? So this is an interesting chart. This is non-connected broadband. So if they're connected, they're not. If they're economically rational, they're not going to buy Satcom. You've got anything else, unless it's DSL. You're not going to buy it. And so this is Africa, Middle East and Africa, mostly Africa. Huge market. But you want to know what the average revenue per user, annual revenue per user? It's like $10 or $20. That is not going to pay for Starlink. So you're kind of left, and you're not going to, this is Asia. By the way, that's China. So we are kind of left with these slivers down here that are already well-penetrated markets. So when we start talking about constellations, darkening the sky, again, is this market going to be sufficient to support it? I'm not saying it is. I mean, still you've got, call it $100 billion. It's not bad. But is that going to be enough? And so the salvation, which I don't really have the charts on it here, may be mobile. But a satellite is going to get, you're going to get text. That's it. You're not, this is, as a friend of mine called it, this is a signal attenuation device. It is not meant to pick up a signal from 200 miles up in orbit. So you can get text, which will be wonderful. I will sign up. I'll pay $5 a month. But again, if you've got somebody here in Africa that's paying $5 a year for everything, I don't know. All I'm saying is what I do know, and it doesn't support the notion that there's going to be a massive transition and the constellations are going to drive everything. I'd love to be wrong. Okay. Let's go someplace that this is actually, I like this way. I really do. Geospatial. Here's the problem with geospatial. Right now, the way the market is structured, you've got about 70 different companies that have satellites doing different things. And they are all trying to sell directly to the end user. And so you've got some undoubtedly very smart person from Silicon Valley dropping in on a farmer in the Mekong Delta, trying to sell them data. He might as well be an astronaut from Mars, right? It's just not a great business model. It will become great when you've got people in the field who know the farmer, who understand the market, and who understand space. What is the best news that I've got here is this market is going to be disaggregated. So you'll have data suppliers from space, data aggregators and AI people that are going to manipulate data somewhere in between. And the people that frankly are going to get rich are going to be like this guy. He is not a professor from Sao Paulo. This guy works for Price Waterhouse. Those are the people that are going to get rich in this economy. But it is going to segregate that way. And this is easy to predict. But the thing that I love about this market is the underlying market, one, is totally dependent on space. You can't get what these guys need other ways. Wait, what is, someone paying them? Anyway, so this market, the underlying market is really large, it's growing, and I think there's tremendous opportunity here. It's probably not gonna grow much beyond, let's say, 100 billion, but it's still a great place to be. Let's go to launch. So I spent about 10 years of my life beating my head against the launch wall. This is kind of a complicated chart. Let me walk you through it. We, when I was at Florida Tech, we did a study for the FAA looking at small launch. And so what we tried to do was, the FAA was like, oh my God, you've got 100 different companies building small launchers. How on earth are we going to regulate these people? Well, the answer is don't worry about it. The market's only going to support about 3. So what we took was the total number of satellites that are out there, subtracted out the stuff that we didn't think was real, subtracted out the stuff that was Starlink and other things like that, subtracted out the stuff that had dedicated launchers, and we ended up with about 3,500 that were going to fly mostly on small ride shares, 2 or 3 at a time. And so we ended up with about 80 launches a year, roughly. And as it turns out, we're not even getting there. We thought we could support 3. Right now, you kind of got 1.5, right? You've got Rocket Labs, which is tremendously successful. They're doing a great job. And you sort of got Firefly. And there'll probably be another 1 or 2, maybe a regional launch system. But that's it. And this was, at the time we did this, which was 1920, this was news. Now it's sort of, yeah. Been there, done that. Okay. So again, it's not a surprise. You got, well, Virgin Galactic isn't really small launch. But what could possibly go wrong in this business? Well, Virgin Galactic, which was worth at some point $57 a share, this is old a little bit. They're like $5 a share now. Astro's bankrupt. Rocket Lab has actually gone up. They're around $15 a share. Virgin Orbit went out of business. It's not hard to predict this stuff. Okay. Where am I going from here? Oh, right. This is actually a really cool set of waves. Space mobility. I started out wanting to hate this, but I actually found some things in here that I like, but they're not huge markets. So let's look at it. This is satellite deorbits, basically taking a dead satellite and bringing it out of orbit. Lots of companies doing this stuff. Doesn't make any sense. They cost you about $4 million to deorbit a satellite. And I'm just calculating literally the amount of fuel that you have to use to deorbit a satellite. How much it costs to put that fuel into orbit. If you've got something which is, if you know you're going to have a collision between 2 large inert objects, spend the $4 million. But that's not really a large market. Here is a market that I really like. LEO to GTO or GEO actually. This is cool because if you take a Falcon 9 and dump it, take it all the way to GTO, then you get a calculation of it's like 5,000. I've forgotten the number, $11,000 a kilogram, something like that. And then you compare that with dropping the satellite off in LEO and then tugging it out to GEO. You actually knock 40% off of SpaceX's price. This makes a lot of sense. The problem is nobody wants to go to GEO anymore. But this is a tidy little business, and it explains why Tom Mueller with Impulse, I think, has a tidy little business. It gets better actually if you're tugging something out to the moon. So tugs for transportation from LEO make a lot of sense. What blows this market wide open is Starship. So think about Starship. What do you do with 100 tons in LEO? I mean, literally, you drop something off in LEO and it has to stay in that plane more or less. Even Starlink doesn't need 100 tons in a plane. So what do you do with it? If you've got some super efficient tugs, you can move things around and make some sense. out of the space economy in which Starship dumps stuff off like a big truck or a ship, and then you have a bunch of Amazon trucks moving things around. Nuclear tugs, in a sense, make a lot of sense. If you can get through all of the, first of all, the non-recurring costs of regulatory issues, all of that stuff. This is kind of, I think, long-term, this is a great place to be. The question is, how many miracles have to happen before this market is realized?
And
This-
why don't they want to go to GTO?
Because most, the telecom people are all in love with Leo right now. I actually think Geo, for a lot of applications, Geo makes more sense. But it's just out of fashion. Fashion, I don't know anything about fashion. But yeah, that's kind of what it is. Here's a sweet little market, little, but sweet. Graveyarding geo satellites. So you take a satellite that's about to die. You cut a deal with them and say, look, I will let you burn through all of your propellant. And I will take you out to a graveyard orbit. Some satellites can extend their life by 6 months. And if you think about it, take a satellite like Viasat 3. Viasat 3 generates $1 billion a year in revenue. If you can buy them another 3 months, another 6 months, that's a lot of money. And you can split that with them.
Because they're responsible themselves for moving to a graveyard orbit
Yes,
with their own fuel right now.
well, it's ITU. Yes, with their own fuel. Yes. It's ITU, so there are no cops to give you a ticket, but it's pretty well recognized. And I don't know of many cases of geo birds consciously just thumbing their nose at it, saying, we're not gonna do that. And it's kind of, you could probably generate 30 or 40 million dollars of revenue per mission, but you're probably not gonna get more than a couple of years. The thing is, it takes you about 7 meters a second to move something out 300 kilometers to a graveyard orbit. That's nothing. I mean, that's literally a kilogram or so of propellant. It's a sweet business, but it's not a big business. Here's a potentially big business. I know you're classified, but we can do this. Okay, it's fueling LEO satellites. Now, the big customer here is the NRO, just national security, where they want to drop down into a VLEO, a very low Earth orbit, so they can get closer, get pictures. Trouble is, you burn a lot of fuel. Going down, you got to go back up. And if you've got a multi-billion-dollar satellite, you'll pay a lot of money to refuel. And I think I would have to shoot myself if I knew. But this is probably a market of probably 10 or 15 refueling opportunities a year-ish, maybe. That's a real market. That's why the Space Force is looking at refueling. The interesting thing here, though, is this is not new. Boeing flew Orbital Express, 2005, I think it was. Orbital Express was a test program funded by DARPA to actually not just refuel a satellite, but to put on new solar arrays, put in new circuit boards. And we did all of that. And we said at the time, I wonder if anybody's going to buy it. Well, they didn't for 20 years. Yeah, Bob.
Do the existing reconnaissance satellites have the appropriate interfaces for someone to come along and refuel them?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It'll be a new generation. It'll be a new generation of refuelable satellites. So that's why the Space Force is starting to look at this. I suspect the NRO is looking at this, and it'll be the next generation of satellites. It'll be refuelable. But right now, no, you can't. You can't just pop off a cabinet. No, they're not ready to be refueled. So it does take sort of a phase change, but the Space Force seems willing to consider that at least. So, lots of little waves. I like some of them here, though. I like some of them. Okay. Now here's the big kahuna of waves, right? Asteroid mining. Thing is, you go out to get an asteroid, and I have put together a straw man here that people that love this stuff will say, no, you're not gonna do it that way. You go out, you lasso a satellite, you bring it back to cislunar space, and you make tons of money. Okay. Let's kind of look at it. So the thing is, you go out there and you're gonna bring something back, it's big. And so I took a 1,000,000-ton asteroid, and I actually pulled data from the Kepler Institute. You all probably remember when we were doing asteroid retrieval missions. So they did a bunch of calculations of what it would take to bring something back. And I sort of extrapolated from that. And I calculated it would take about 125 Starship launches just to get the propellant out there to bring, and this is, I think, xenon. So it's efficient propulsion to bring this thing back. That's a lot of money up front. Okay. So I did a net present value calculation. I don't have all my figures, so I think I used 5% discount, which isn't a big deal. And it was, I think, $5 billion non-recurring to do all of this stuff. Most of what you spent it on is Starship launches. And I picked platinum. Because it's hard to find something more valuable than platinum. You know, maybe you've got like some sort of rhodium or something that might be worth a little bit more. But we think there's platinum in some of these asteroids. And in fact, MIT, again, as part of this Kepler Institute stuff, calculated that normal concentrations of platinum and platinum ore are about 4 grams per ton. MIT said, we think it's about 10 or so. In order for this to work and to get to a positive net present value, you have to have 2,500 grams per ton of platinum. There may be one out there that has that. The trouble is, how do you know? Right? We do not know what the composition of Psyche is. I mean, we've calculated it's worth 1,800,000 quadrillion dollars. And based on what, I don't know. But JPL doesn't know what it's made of. So how are you going to know something's got a high concentration of platinum? By the way, if you do this for nickel, it just doesn't work. It doesn't. So I don't know. And then my asteroid buddies say, no, you put a factory on it and you just bring the stuff back. What could possibly go wrong? You're putting a factory on an asteroid that has 0 gravity. I'm just trying to make sense out of this stuff.
And who would you sell the platinum to? I mean, I don't know.
Wouldn't you love to have a platinum? Actually,
Yeah.
well, since internal combustion engines are going out of business, and one of the biggest consumers of platinum right now is our cars catalytic converter. Don't know.
Oh, the platinum.
Right, and what would you do with, hang on. What would you do with 1,000 tons of platinum on the market? What would that do to the market? I don't know. This is what I teach. I teach my students to think about stuff. Don't just accept some internet blog that says there's a $3 billion suborbital tourism market in 2025. Oh, wait a minute, we're in 2025. How much money has anybody made? Think about it. Just take some time and think about it. Oh, this is not the right place. But getting back to telecom and constellations, we actually did a similar analysis for the FAA, trying to figure out whether these things make economic sense. Again, this is 2020-ish. We ran net present values on Starlink 1, Starlink 3, which is about where we're at right now. OneWeb, 1.2, Kuiper, and Lightspeed. The only one that begins to even generate a positive net present value after spending $162 billion, it generates 2.8 billion of positive net present value, is Starlink. And that assumes they basically maxed out their capacity. So we're basically assuming a complete market for this, which, as I said, I don't really necessarily buy. But anyway, so it's not obvious that these constellations are gonna make a lot of sense. I just want to conclude with a positive thought. So this is something, no one will actually, there's another version of this chart that probably many of you have seen. All the canceled programs in NASA. On the red programs here, are programs that have been canceled. The blue ones are the ones that sort of continue to a logical termination, or in the case of the space station, they're still going. And you see a lot of cancellations. In fact, if you look at it, if you actually look at money spent on those canceled programs, it's about $22 billion. Which is more than what the doggies have saved us. Anyway, so here's the interesting thing, which will surprise none of you. How do these cancellations happen? Well, these are mostly all human spaceflight programs, by the way. They happen with administration changes. So Clinton came in, canceled a bunch of stuff. Bush comes in, cancels a bunch of stuff. Obama comes in, cancels a bunch of stuff. Interesting thing, Trump really didn't cancel anything first time around. But now there's Elon. So I mean, you can draw your own lines there right now. But anyway, this is kind of the world that we live in. So what do I think? This is a purely notional wave chart, if you will. So we've had a couple of little waves of investment, and here we are today. Things are going great, but this is where we are. And I'll be honest with you, right now it looks like we're here more than here. But so that's not to say there aren't great markets to be in, but you got to be careful where you invest, what wave you're going to ride. Anyway, come on, give me my last chart.
There it is.
Okay, there's the ultimate wave you want to surf.
But this time,
No, hang on. Go back. I need my shameless pitch. Back. Okay. Album, right. I will throw in a shameless pitch for my program at Embry-Riddle University as Leonard so kindly mentioned, largest space studies program. We'll just say in the solar system for now. But the lesson here isn't that I expect you all to run out and jump in my program. I got 1,000 students. I don't need any more. But what that tells us is there are a lot of people that are still really interested in learning about space and participating in space. And it's a great time to be surfing. You just got to be careful what waves you ride. Anyway, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. Questions, comments, tomatoes?
Yeah, could you look at the potential market for surface to surface transportation, Los Angeles to Sydney in an hour, that kind of stuff?
No, but I'll tell you what I think. I have thought about it. So if you've got a rocket in Los Angeles and you got a place to land it in Sydney, makes all the sense in the world. But if you got to get from Las Vegas to Adelaide, it doesn't make as much sense because you may save 10 hours. But think about it. You get in your car, you drive to Las Vegas, you wait, you get on a plane from Las Vegas, you get to LA, and now you got to get to wherever the starbase is while the starship is fueling and all of that kind of stuff. And when you look to the end to end, I'm not sure you're going to save all that much time. Now, if you're talking about the defense side of it, think about that. Take a C-17, maybe a C-5, and you can get that point to point, exactly where you want to be. All you need is a landing strip. And so when you're talking about vertical landing, vertical takeoff, vertical landing, doesn't make any sense. If you're talking about horizontal takeoff and horizontal landing, assuming you have the infrastructure at the other end, it makes sense if you're close to point. But it's not, you gotta think about it in terms of the entire chain, from where you are to where you wanna be. And saving a few hours in the middle may not save you all that much. So maybe it works, if you're going from LA to Sydney and you've got a base in both places, it works. But I'm not sure how much of a market that is. Anything else? Yes, you're first.
Oh, yeah, just any chance space tourism might be more successful than it has been?
God, I hope so. No, it will be. I mean, so there's purely commercial tourism. And so here's how I think about, mostly orbital, because the numbers are smaller, I can actually figure those out. So what I did for that was I looked at the number, I assumed that, the kind of watermark would be 1% of your net present value, net worth, is what you spend on an outrageous vacation. And if you think about it, it's not a bad number, kind of works out. And so at 50 million, you've got to have people that are about $50 billion. 5 billion. Yeah, I think it's 5 billion. So how many people out there have a net worth of 5 billion or greater? And it's actually a pretty big, it's like 100, 150, something like that. But you got to cut out anybody who's Chinese, Russian, Iranian, or anybody who's more than 80. And that sort of leaves you with your total addressable market. And then what you look at from there is how many of those people are actually going to spend their money on being a castronaut as opposed to a super yacht. And there are a lot more super yachts than there are castronauts right now. But I mean, that's sort of the trade-off for commercial. So I mean, you kind of get to those numbers and you can get to $1 billion, $1.5 billion a year. That kind of, but much beyond that, you got to bring the price down a lot. Unless you've got Starship, but even if it's a Starship, you've still got a $200 million launch, and so you take up 20 people. And so, you know, maybe instead of 50 million, you're at 10 or 20 million per person to do it with a Starship. Still a lot of money. The interesting market, but again, it's kind of limited, is what I'll call sovereign tourism. So Saudi Arabia, Hungary is spending $100 million to send somebody up to the space station. And if you kind of look at the GDP of Hungary as a spacefaring nation, they shouldn't be doing that, but they are. And it's a national pride thing. But if it's based on national pride, how many people are you going to send up there? And so then you look at it and you go, okay, maybe you got 50 countries. And so 50 people, maybe times 2, 100 people. I mean, I think that's kind of what you're thinking about for orbital tourism. Suborbital numbers could be a lot bigger. But I mean, that's kind of, I'm just trying to draw a circle around what I think is a sensible market. It's not 10,000 people.
Orbital research labs.
Oh, now we're talking. Okay, so in theory, there are things that you might be able to do in space. I think the vacuum is probably worth more than microgravity. But here's the thing. Right now, there are some people from real companies that are doing NASA-funded experiments on the space station. And that's all cool. But it's still space people selling to space people. We will be successful in that market when the CTO of Merck, when the CTO of NVIDIA has a CLD on their speed dial as one of their laboratories they're regularly going to use. And the trouble is right now we're space cadets talking to other space cadets about these markets. And they could be there. They're massive markets, right? Pharmaceutical spends like 40 or 50% of their revenue on research and development. It's god-awful sums of money. Semiconductors are lower numbers, but still it's a lot of money. And if we could get, I'm talking like a space cadet, if they could spend 10% of that money on productive space research that is making money for them, that would be a big market. But I think we've got to get out of the mentality of it's space, it must be great. It's great when the CTO thinks it's great, right? And right now, we don't have, that's not happening. And
Well,
it-
you space cadets need a better story then. To make it great.
So, I don't remember, was it helium-3 that was gonna be?
Yeah. Yeah.
Lunar mining?
Yeah. No, and so, I mean, and there's helium-3 on the moon. And for certain types of fusion reactors, helium-3 is necessary, and it's, I guess, pretty scarce here. So in theory, there's a market there. Jack Schmidt is nuts over it, and in theory, it could be. But you have to have a causal chain of events happen before that makes sense. And if you're an investor, you're waiting to see that causal chain. You wouldn't invest in it right now, because what happens, excuse me, if you have like colliding beam fusion, I forget, there's a company called Tri-Alpha that's doing like this colliding beam thing that doesn't need helium-3. I think tokamak reactors need helium-3. So if you're gonna bet on helium-3, these other guys better not win. Right, but so there's a potential market for that. There's a potential market for propellant. But if you can sell propellant off of the moon, you gotta be able to get it to low Earth orbit for less than what it costs you to get a kilogram from Earth to low Earth orbit. And right now it's $5,000 a kilogram. That's a tough nut to crack. You could transport it for about $1,500, $2,000 a kilogram from the moon to Leo. But then you got $3,000 to actually produce that kilogram.
Cool. I've heard, people wanna build, server farms in space and cool it with helium-3.
Well, so, and actually, so we want a causal chain that would make sense. If there is space-based solar power in any kind of scale, I mean, you're talking about thousands and thousands of tons of mass. And if you can get, and in geo, and if you can get that mass off of the moon to geo, you can get it to geo cheap. It makes a lot of sense, because geos, particularly geo, not GTO, is a really energetic orbit. And so it's a lot cheaper to take it from the moon to geo. But if are you going to invest in a factory building solar panels on the moon right now? Probably not. A lot of stuff's got to happen. And so the thing for investors to watch is what are the events that need to occur to enable that market, and at what point does the market risk get to the point where you're ready to invest? That's not now, but that, I mean, it could happen. It's not ridiculous. There are a lot of people that really believe in this stuff. And they're not crazy.
And any other questions here? We got a couple people on Zoom who have been waiting patiently.
Oh.
So,
Okay.
Fran Bagnall, you've had your hand up for a bit. What you got?
Thank you. Very interesting talk. Very interested in your perspective, honest presentation about commercial applications. And indeed, I could see commercial applications for communication and launch and so on. But from a science perspective, I have my doubts. And what I am concerned about is actually more that the training of the US science and technological workforce at the universities. We train at the University of Colorado many tens of students at any one time, say 30 per mission that we have, and we have dozens of missions happening. We're training the workforce that will go into industry and that will go into not only science but also technology and industrial stuff. But industry can't train these people. We need the money to the universities to be training the workforce. And so I'm a little concerned about this push to go 100% commercial and ditch the universities because we're not going to be able to train the people, provide the workforce.
I hope nothing that I said gave you the impression that I was saying ditch the universities. In fact, what
No,
I'm saying.
I didn't get that impression from you, but other people are saying that. Yeah, thank you.
That they happen to be running the country, right? I can't do anything about it. I completely agree with you, which is why in my 2 day jobs, at Embry-Riddle, I'm training the next generation of people that are going to be running space programs. They're not going to be your scientists. You guys are doing a wonderful job training the scientists. I mean, I think we do a great job training scientists. I think we do kind of a less great job sometimes training people to manage and run space companies. But that's as a guy who grew up running space companies. So I completely agree with you. The other thing I do at the foundation is we take the fascination of space and bring it into, it's mostly K through 12, but we're trying to get the kids curious, passionate about learning. Some of them will go into space, some of them will go into very different areas.
But they'll do their math homework because you inspire them via space. Yeah.
Absolutely. That is absolutely true. Give them something relevant to do with the numbers, right? Okay,
Yeah.
other question?
Right. Thank you.
John Williams, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question for Andy. Your numbers on the commercialization, the private investment of space, I was wondering if it took into account the huge investment that the US government makes in SpaceX and Blue Origin to do their research.
No, I mean, that's not, do I take it into account in what I do as far as thinking about space and all of that? Absolutely. I mean, there was one chart I put up there of the $1 trillion space economy, and remember that the bottom part of that was infrastructure, that's launch vehicles and satellites, and the vast majority of that money comes from the government. In fact, if I pointed out, there's a little green sliver in that chart, which is commercial satellites. So yeah, if you're talking about what I'll call real space infrastructure, the government is paying for it.
But when you had the chart up for the investment from private companies.
Oh, no, that chart was, right, that was just, yeah. So the point I was making with that chart is that private investment is going a little bit into a lot of different industries, but 2 or 3 charts prior to that, maybe the chart just before that, I showed what the $1 trillion space economy is, and the part of that which is satellite and rocket hardware, which is paid for by the governments.
I guess I'm saying I'm a little skeptical that the private industries are spending so much. The government's funneling the money into the private that puts it into space. But I was just curious about the numbers that you were showing. So,
well, if you look, when you're talking about satellites and hardware, the vast majority of that money is coming from governments. If you're talking about GPS application, the vast majority of money is coming from you and me and our cell phones. That's the application side of it.
gotcha. Thanks.
Yes.
So, okay. How do you see this new budget? Some of us know that the budget came out and they're gonna cancel the Mars sample return. The space launch system, the big rocket that NASA made. And how do you see that impacting your students? And the fact that a lot of that is engineering jobs. I mean, and one thing I guess I want to ask about that. So if we have all these layoffs of all these people who were working on those, will there be the jobs for your students?
Well, the thing to bear in mind is, so NASA's 25 billion. Again, I'd have to shoot myself if I knew. But if you look at the government, the national security side of it, it's something between 70 and 90 billion dollars that we spend on national security space. And so if we're talking about probably 7 billion of the NASA money going away, it doesn't look like DoD space, national security space is going to take much of a hit at all. In fact, it'll probably increase. So if you're looking at the government space economy writ large, it's not a massive hit. But let me just say, the budget that is getting tossed around Washington right now is, how do I put it? Well, it's
Insane.
it is insane, and it's part of a game that's a chicken that's being played between the administration and Congress. And unfortunately, the space community is one of many communities in the US that's caught in the middle of this mess. I think when it's I think that we are likely to see hits. There's no question that this administration will decimate anything that has to do with climate science. I would say Earth observation, but they're gonna put a ton of money into the NRO and anyone that's, looking for bad guys around the world. Other than that, I think I hope there are real debates over space science. I'm less convinced that we need to fall on our sword over SLS. I mean, we know how to launch stuff into space.
So if a lot of those jobs are gonna be in the military, because I guess that budget's going up. Do your students study like cybersecurity?
Yeah, they do, actually. We have a course in cybersecurity. I have quite a few students that are kind of moving into that more and more. I mean, that's a huge field. The thing about, I'm gonna go on a little bit of a tangent, the thing about cybersecurity in space that bothers me that I don't hear many people talking about is what happens when someone gets a hold of a satellite and starts playing bumper pool with it. And I say this only because one of my students literally did that. He didn't play bumper pool, but he took control of the satellite. Fortunately for everyone, this was a sanctioned activity and the guy works for MITRE, but he was literally part of a student group that their challenge was taking control of the satellite. And so think about what you could do with a satellite and you just find an inert object and go run into it. There's nothing anybody could do about it. And now you do that a couple of times and large sections of space don't become uninhabitable, but they just become really expensive to maneuver around all of this stuff. Add to that the deterrence notion. I grew up in the Rand Corporation, so to speak, and so I grew up thinking about deterrence and blowing up the world. It's great fun because nobody was going to do it. But if you look at first strike stability, the last thing you want to be in is a situation in which your adversary is far better off by striking first. And so pick your adversary, was China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. If they were to disable everything in space with a couple of EMP, maybe take 10 EMP weapons, they would be far better off. The United States would be destroyed because we depend upon our space assets to maintain our military presence. And so that's not a great place to be. And so that worries me because the sort of creating a dead zone in space by capturing satellites and running them into other things is a real cybersecurity nightmare. And it's more than just getting information stolen or jammed or something like that. That's pretty concerning. And I know we're thinking about it, but it's pretty concerning because we don't build satellites the same way. When I grew up, when we built a satellite, you had the bus and you had the payload, and there was a wall between them because you never wanted anybody who's playing around with the payload to get any control over the bus. Satellites aren't built that way anymore. Starlink is not built that way. Because it costs money. You can't do a small satellite by having two completely different systems. And so there's risk there. And so are you going to get Kuiper or Starlink or Planet to actually pay to introduce cybersecurity measures without a lot of regulation? I don't know how you do that. And if you hadn't noticed, the country is not in a very regulatory mood right now. And this is a problem. It's a big problem.
Let's roll it back to investment for a minute.
Something nice.
So a few years ago, I consulted on a project in China to teach kids space science. And they're ramping up about as quickly or more quickly than we did in the early days of the space age. We were putting, science classes in the schools, we were building planetariums and science centers. Are you guys, when you're doing these computations for investment, are you considering at all the ramp up in China?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I mean, I made the comment once when we look at the telecom market, split that in two, because China's going to get half of it. There's going to be a sort of Belt and Road space economy and then a Western space economy. So yeah, absolutely. But as I grew up, as a Sovietologist, I studied the Soviet Union as at the Rand Corporation, I had office looking down Santa Monica Pier, what could possibly be wrong? So that's how I ended up in space industry, because I was actually studying the Soviet space program. And the lesson here is, what I found out was we do a great. No. What I found out that was the 10-foot tall Red Army soldier that we thought, I mean, we had this monolith that the Red Army ran the Soviet space program. And I found out it didn't take long to figure out that didn't make any sense at all. The money all came from the Central Committee directly to the design bureaus. They had all the information, they had all the money. They gave the military what they wanted to build for them. And there's a long story about the structure of Soviet industry. Does that apply to China? I don't know, but Chinese defense industry looks a lot like Soviet defense industry did. And right now we are mightily worried about competing with China and Chinese state-owned organizations. If we can't outcompete Chinese state organizations among the least efficient economic organizations on the planet Earth, then we deserve to lose. Now, that's not to say there aren't a lot of interesting commercial things going on, but even then, it's kind of weird in China. And I'm not a sinologist, so I'm speaking on secondary sources only. It's not so much the central government investing in space, it's regional governments. And it's part of kind of a regional competition in China. And at that point, I've kind of reached my limits of understanding what's going on with China. I think it's really worth trying to understand more about what's going on. Unfortunately, I don't think anybody's gonna get the opportunity that I had. I was going to the Soviet Union as it was falling apart, and I was able to talk to anybody anytime. People that ran design bureaus flying me around in their corporate jets until they didn't have any corporate jets anymore. Then I had to take trains. But you can't get that kind of access in China now. So we don't really, I think there's a group I think it's Air Force War College in Montgomery, Alabama, I forget, that does some really good work on the organization of Chinese military and Chinese space program specifically. That's really pretty good.
There's been cultural differences from that. And that's what, when they sat us down to say, here's what we want from you, they didn't want data, about our government or anything. They wanted to know how we were able to think outside the box. That's what we're there.
That's interesting.
Particularly in terms of teaching kids about space science and astronomy and.
Did it work?
I don't know. I didn't get to go back because the pandemic hit.
Okay.
So.
No, for a brief period of time, I was co-director of a Sino-US Space Research Institute between Florida Tech and Beijing Institute of Technology, but between the new Cold War and COVID, that just fell apart. Excuse me.
Any other questions? Any Zoomers? All right, then I think it's time to say thank you again.
Leonard, I earned my dinner.
All right, well, next up will in fact be Leonard. And then after that, Drew's got something to talk about, and then David Elmore has a neat picture to show. So let me get this all straight here.
So doing, Andy and Brian are gonna have to leave pretty soon. Do we want to try to do a group picture?
No, we should leave before you do that.
Yeah.
Oh, we just,
Not feeling photogenic, but lovely to meet everyone.
Thank you so much.
yeah,
I-
okay. Well, I guess our stars will be missing from our picture then.
Yeah, we love.
Oh, we'll Photoshop them in.
Yeah, that's right. Not a problem Photoshop can't fix. From the beginning.
Hit the space bar.
There's the clicker. It seems to be working.
Okay,
See, take it away.
I got my notes, so you know what I'm talking about. Maybe. Well, it's May 3rd. We had an interesting, to get to Andy's point about, and some of the question about space tourism. We do have kind of a interesting development always with the Blue Origin New Shepard suborbital flights, and the last one was just the 11th human space flight for the New Shepard program. This is all backed by Jeff Bezos and the Blue Origin group. But, you know, they flew 6 females for the first time. Got a lot of press, some bad, some good. But, you know, when I listened to them come back down, I don't know much about singers and, you know, TV personalities. You know, they all had sort of the overview effect, strike them in different ways. And that was, to me, worth the whole flight of listening to these folks come back and describe their feelings as they departed on a suborbital flight. They went, you know, pretty high, come back down, not all that long up there, but free fall, and definitely an interesting crew. On the other hand, we've had some really interesting thing happen the other day that we were watching this live, and I know Don Pettit, the astronaut that was on this flight, Expedition 72. He landed with two Russian cosmonauts, and they landed in their Soyuz spacecraft. All of them had been up in space for 220 days. The interesting thing about Don Pettit, it was his 70th birthday. And he came back. We were watching this and we go, I don't think he's well. He looked like he broke his arm or something, because they moved away from him. And there's very few moments where he was on camera. And it turned out later on, he was pretty much throwing up all over the steps there of the Kazakhstan landing zone. He was pretty wiped out. But it very interesting that we're still not quite sure about the effects of microgravity, to me, on the human body at different age levels and male or female. So we're learning as we go. But Don Pettit was an incredible astronaut up there, and did probably the most creative experiments and photography that I can imagine. He's done some just, I think it was the 3rd or 4th flight up there, and he was just doing stellar work. But he's well and fit now, and probably will retire out of the astronaut corps, I'd assume. But
And I think since it was his birthday,
he ate too much birthday cake up there. I don't know what happened, but he was really sick. Then on the other side of this is the Chinese space station program. Just a few days ago landed what they call the Shenzhou 19 crew of 3 people. They previously had launched the Shenzhou 20 to take over the space station that China is operating up there. But this is a picture of the handover ceremony and then the landing. So they're moving ahead with their space station program. And, you know, just the other day, I wrote a piece on, you know, what the kind of experiments they're doing. I never can figure out whether or not they're doing some unique research compared to what the ISS is doing, but definitely a different cultural viewpoint of science experiments in space, about radiation, about flying all kinds of insects, and they seem to be in a different wave. I'll use Andy's a wavefront of looking at different kind of experiments in space. So I always keep an eye on the Chinese. We also had just on what did I say? April 20th. That happened not too long ago. Lucy spacecraft by NASA flew by Donald Johanson as a test run to the main event later years from now, visiting never before explored Trojan asteroids in the Jupiter system. The team, we went over there for a press briefing on it, and it was pretty interesting. We have the head guy, Hal Levinson, which I guess we're hoping he's going to come here and give us a briefing on what on Lucy and where the next asteroid encounter is going to be and what time. What was it? Like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. I don't know. That's all I remember. But anyway, it was a great experiment. Flyby, got another picture of an asteroid, and it's one of those asteroids that looked really weird. And Hal Levinson tried to explain it as bringing ice cream cones together. The speed of whatever these objects are that melded together is very, very slow, about walking speed is what I heard. And so how unique that is compared to other asteroids. And I think if Clark Chapman's on the line, I asked him if he maybe just explain, main belt asteroid, which is this one, versus Trojan asteroids. What's the difference? Clark, you on there?
Yeah, I'm here. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. The main belt of asteroids is between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. And the Trojan asteroids are in Jupiter's orbit, although actually a long way from Jupiter, both ahead of Jupiter in its orbit and behind Jupiter in its orbit. And to get out that far in the solar system, you have to go through the asteroid belt. And so they take advantage of their trajectory headed out to the first Trojan comes near some asteroids, and so they can tweak the spacecraft a little bit and come really close. And so the first asteroid they flew by, named Dinkinish, turned out to have a pretty nice moonlet of its own. Now, Donald Johanson, as you say, is sort of two separate things sort of smashed together. And it's actually not that rare at all. There's a number of asteroids and comets that look like this. And they're basically like, it seems like two bodies came together at, as you said, at low velocity. And I don't know what fraction it is, but maybe 10% of asteroids look like this. And I think one of the Trojans, actually, we already know from ground-based observations may be like one of this, but it's going to be a number of years before the spacecraft gets out to the Trojans and we get to see what they look like up close.
Great. Thank you. Okay, one thing I've been following, it's really a lot of fun. This is a picture from a museum in Moscow of a Venera lander. This is a Venus lander that the Soviets, the former Soviet Union, they launched a number of these. Several of them worked and got to Venus. But one of them did not get out of Earth orbit and left its descent module in space, and that was like 50. What did I write?
17.
Yeah, 1972, about 53 years ago or so. So it's up there, and it's getting so close now to reentry on its own that people are trying to figure out, is this thing gonna come in? It was built to survive the Venusian atmosphere, and which is a lot thicker, you know, and the probability is that it can, and it's I don't know, half a ton is a fairly significant thing. Anyway, I started, luckily, I over my years, I've got to know a lot of the satellite watchers that are just phenomenal around the world. And sure enough, they have been training their cameras on this thing in the last week or so. And they're getting some great imagery of it as it gets closer to reentry time. And, you know, one speculation is that one guy even sees a parachute hanging out there that was deployed that never, you know, it'll all burn up when on reentry. But the chances are fairly significant that this thing's going to survive the fall and land on land or land in the ocean, who knows. But anyway, it's a great little story evolving. I think that this morning I checked on the reentry date. They seem to be coalescing on May 10th, so it's not that far away. So we'll see. Keep, you know, stay inside. Or give me a call. Because I want to do a follow-up story. It's going to be an interesting event. And then we've been talking in large measure here about the NASA budget and limbo. Yeah, it's a mess. We have some significant cuts that the Trump administration is proposing through the Congressional Budget Office under the White House. And who knows where this is going to go, but it has tremendous ramifications on the program of record by NASA of Artemis and the Orion spacecraft and other elements of the space program that we've known and loved for a long time. And so who knows where this is going to go. One of the stories is the Mars sample return, which was sort of out of control already because of overruns and technical issues that were manifested themselves so much that it became too much even for NASA. And so they've had numbers of study groups trying to cut back on that mission and try to get it in an envelope of private sector may help, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of stuff. But I think one problem with any of these things in limbo is probably the right way to say it, because, you know, the budgets from NASA for NASA will be out. We'll know more detail in maybe a week or so, or a couple of weeks. And then it goes to Capitol Hill. And as a survivor of Washington, D.C. for 30 years, God help us. I have no idea what Congress is going to respond. I mean, it's a Trump-led Republican, you know, right now they may salute the budget and everything goes, but I think there's going to be a lot of give and take. And so who knows what the total evolution of the budget's going to be. But it's certainly something that all day today I've had emails from every conceivable person that's involved in planning the future of NASA efforts, and it's a very worrisome time for most concerned. So, and then you're still left with Elon Musk, the wild card. We're still waiting for the next Starship mission, which you know, every day I look at the web cameras of what's going on in Texas as the Starship development for the next flight is stacking up. So he's going to fly another mission here. He's had back-to-back Starship failures, and we don't know exactly how this program is really going to ring out. But he's got a long way to go to make this thing as routine as he wants to have it. So it's a puzzle. So what now? And that's all I got to say about it.
one thing you didn't mention with the NASA budget being cut is the National Science Foundation
Yeah,
has
do
been in
that.
the same free fall.
Yeah, okay, what, I haven't had time to look, and maybe you have, what implications are there for ground-based astronomy? I mean, what else in that NSF budget is worrisome?
Well,
John?
so Doge is in the NSF right now, doing what Doge is doing, trying to cut staff. So what I've heard is already the Trump appointee, the head of the NSF, he quit last week saying he's done all he can do.
Yeah,
So there's lack of leadership now, and Trump will appoint another NSF director. But then also there's talk of 55% cut in staff and budget. And what that means for ground-based astronomy. So there's also health that some of the stuff goes through the NIH, but also some of it comes through the NSF. This is university funding. Fran probably knows more about it than I do, but those if cuts happen to the National Science Foundation, it cuts right across a lot of the basic research and a lot of the basic universities, the national observatories, like where I work at the National Solar Observatory, also the Noir Lab, which has the Gemini and Rubin, which is about to come online, which is down in South America. We'll do one of these weekly surveys of the entire sky, and is expected to find, comets and asteroids that might impact Earth, but also supernovas, novas, and other changes in the night sky. So, we were right at the cusp of some fairly exciting solar or science projects, just like for NASA projects. And,
Yeah.
that is all sort of in jeopardy now, right?
okay. So there's no truth in the rumor that Trump is asking Beyonce to take over NSF?
I don't know. It could happen.
It could happen.
I haven't heard that. I haven't heard that rumor. It's kind of funny.
No, but I'm starting it now.
Ah, perfect.
Yeah. Okay.
See where we are? It's like, that's so crazy that it sounds true.
Yeah, right.
First comment, has anyone heard anything about the Giant Magellan Telescope or the 30-meter telescope? No, even before Trump got in, the funding for those has been cut way back, and so we're probably not gonna get either of them in the near term. But I have a question, do you know anything about the date they're gonna vote on, Jarek Isaacman?
Oh, the day they're gonna vote on him? No, I haven't heard a day.
Or what?
He moved up, he went to the committee and he got okayed.
Yeah.
And now it's to the full Senate, and it could take weeks, months, I don't know.
Okay.
They need the guy in there now, or
Somebody.
blame, get somebody in there to blame, that's all I care about. Now we're at a point where Jared looks like a shoe-in. I hope he's wearing shoes, cause he's gonna have to run pretty fast, Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm rambling. Carolyn, you had something to add? No?
No.
Okay. Well, don't add it.
All right.
All right, we're good. All right,
Okay. So
let's do those
we got
astrophotography.
couple more things. David Elmore, we're gonna try kind of an experiment showing a JPEG of the big picture he's got. And then Judy's got something to talk about, and then we'll do the picture. Is that okay, Judy?
Everybody's leaving. It's, yeah.
And then we'll do the picture and then go outside and look at stars through John's telescope. All right. All right. Oh. Pull that up on the big screen here.
Okay. So this is an image I took from my little observatory in New Mexico. Field of view is about the width of your hand at arm's length. So it's a pretty big piece of sky. Let's see, the most striking things in the image are galaxies M81 and M82 down on the left-hand side. And that's not what I was going for, but they just happen to be there. M82 is the one that has the hydrogen alpha streaming out of the core. Theory is that once upon a time, it and M81 interacted, triggered a bunch of star formation. A lot of hot young stars have blown up and caused that hydrogen alpha emission. But what I was going for is the background. And this is called the Volcano Nebula. And it's integrated flux nebula. So Milky Way galaxy, big plane. This is a cloud which is suspended a little bit above the plane of the galaxy. It's gas, it's dust, it's actually only tens of degrees above absolute zero. But just like a cloud hanging over the Denver metro area, it's being illuminated by the light below it. And in this case, it's the integrated starlight from all the stars in the galaxy. So it's not very bright. It takes, this is 7 hours of exposure taken over a couple of nights in order to bring it out. There's a fair amount of this stuff out there, and it's kind of fun to image. People have looked at my images over the last couple of years, and including me, and discovered 6 new planetary nebulae that had not previously been identified just because of these deep images. And I looked at this image and I said, oh, I've found another one. Look at this purple glob here at the bottom of the Volcano Nebula. I couldn't find it in any catalogs. So sent it off to some experts, and someone came back and said, yep, that's WPS3. It was discovered a couple of years ago and named. So we just missed out on this object, but it's probably not a planetary nebula. It actually is just probably part of that integrated flux nebula. It's being illuminated by a very bright ultraviolet radiating star, which is just off the bottom of the screen. That UV radiation is hitting the gas in the volcano, exciting hydrogen and oxygen and making that color the way I've encoded it. So there's several interesting things that showed up in that 7 hours of integration from my little observatory, and it's fun. Yes.
So is that in the visual wavelengths plus hydrogen alpha or what? Yeah.
This is an emission line image. So it's hydrogen alpha, oxygen 3, sulfur 2. Hydrogen alpha is red. Oxygen 3 is teal. That's pretty nice if you want to make a color image. Problem is sulfur 2 is a little bit redder than hydrogen. So how do you mix it in? So I just say, I've got 3 black and white images. What do I want to do with them? Hydrogen alpha is red. Sure, that sounds good. Oxygen, I make green. Oxygen, I make blue. And sulfur, I make green. So it differentiates the 3 species into colors. And if you see a mixture like magenta, it's between blue and red. So that means lots of oxygen, lots of hydrogen, but not very much of the green. If you mix in the green, then it just turns white. So that's how I created those colors. Yes, John.
Did you also do an LRGB?
I also did LRGB, and I have that as well.
If you explain.
So that's luminance, red, green, blue. So I spent a couple of nights doing that as well. And the Volcano Nebula just blast through in the LRGB image. But these other things are not very prominent. So that's why I picked this one to show tonight. One of the things you can do when you have both emission line and LRGB is you can do some differences. So I could use my LRGB and subtract all of the nebula, all of the volcano nebula out of this image. And in fact, I've done that, and I have an image only of WPS3, only the magenta blob shows up when you subtract it that way. Or I could subtract the narrowband off of this to get rid of that ugly magenta blob, and I didn't do that one.
All right. Anybody on Zoom have any questions for? All right, Judy, do you want to get up and say something about?
Yeah. Okay,
And we can always reprise it next time as well.
in my,
Now, just come back here so the people hear you on the mic.
can't see you anyway.
Yeah, oh, it's.
In my ongoing treasure hunts, which means one day last week, I had 5 thrift shops in one day. I found these absolutely wonderful, glorious mugs. Now, I'm not gonna go all girly on you and say, oh, they're so cute. They are fascinating. They have a mini galaxy on the side. And so I found quite a bunch of them for quite a good price. And I was going to try to auction them off, see what kind of price we could rise as SkyWatchers fundraiser. Unfortunately, we've lost 3/4 of the audience, but is anybody willing to bid more than $5 for one of these mugs? I don't think so.
Wait, read what it says on it.
It says, our past and future are in the stars. It has the Earth, and a pair of hands, and a mini galaxy with some orbits and, oh, there's asterisms, there's comets, there's planets with rings around them.
$10.
Gone.
All right.
And there are 9 of them back there left. I will leave it up to you to let your conscience be your guide, how much you want to spend on them, or we can save them for next time.
Okay, so I think that's a wrap. We have John Essel's